Welcome to Culture Radar, Australia's leading smart safety culture platform. Do you want to transform your safety culture from your Achilles heel into your competitive edge? Stay tuned to find out how, as Dr. Garry Marling shines a light on important safety issues as he interviews globally recognised safety experts and talks about why an appropriate safety culture is vital to you and your organisation. Are you putting your people at the centre of safety? Find out now.
Mark, thanks very much for coming down to have a chat to us. Coffee and culture, and let's start off with you telling us a little bit about your business. It's Investigations Differently, which is an interesting name. I understand that it comes from the roots of the Safety 2 movement, or theme, as I call it.
Yeah.
So you can just give us a broad outline about your company and what it does.
So our company helps organisations improve the outcomes from their incident investigations, and we do that by using based on the principles of human organisational performance, safety 1 and 2, safety differently, just restorative culture. So basically, we offer services in training or mentoring. We also help them do the investigation. So if they need us to do an investigation for a serious incident, or we can mentor their people through it and guide them and help with a guided investigation as well. So, but it's based on actually truly identifying the systemic issues that exist in an event in a different way that traditional linear type investigations quite often miss.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
Right. Probably done you injustice because I just spoke about safety too, but all those other things you're pulling in as well into your process.
Definitely, because it has to be based on, we need to understand the principles of human organisational performance. It's no point in an organisation going down this path if they don't actually believe that humans make mistakes. And those blockages to learning, because at the end of the day, an investigation is about learning what may have gone wrong in that particular point in time, but also learning all the issues and the context and the conditions that surround just the work itself. So because those things are there 100% of the time, it's just that 0.001% when something goes wrong that they suddenly thought, oh, let's have an investigation, and they think that the findings, or what they might find out of that, is applicable to 99% of the work, and that's actually not the case. So quite often the systemic issues, the true systemic issues, get missed because they don't. They just focus on just that very linear timeline of the event itself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. So now that we've got a bit of an understanding of what you do, and I think the key thing that came from that is to actually get some sort of learning out of the investigation as well. Can you tell me how getting that full holistic learning impacts on an organisation's culture?
So investigations generally are a significant driver in the culture of an organisation, I find, in my experience. How an organisation responds to an incident occurring or an unwanted event, how they respond to that drives the culture of an organisation. So, can be a contributor. So it's not a soul, obviously, but it's a contributor. So if they have a blame culture in their investigation, so a typical investigation, I've seen it so many times, it drives me nuts, where they'll blame the worker didn't follow a procedure. Therefore, we blame the worker for not following the procedure, and we stop there. So what are we going to do? We're going to retrain the worker in the procedure, and then we might write them up or discipline them as well. Have they learned anything? Not a thing. Will it stop it from happening again? Not a chance. So what does the worker learn if they're blamed? The worker learns not to get blamed again.
Maybe not report it.
And how do they get not blamed? They don't report it. I recently did a survey. It was only small. It was only about 37 organisations. It was a quick survey, and most of them agreed that they thought they had a strong safety culture, reporting culture in their organisation. Yet about 80% of those same organisations reported they were aware of at least one unreported incident in the previous 12 months. You can't have it both ways. I think I think for any and like there's a whole and there's there's a whole lot of ways that companies attempt to survey their people, pulse surveys and things. One of the questions I really like to ask, and not in a survey sense so much as I don't do that too much. That was just an organisational thing I put out there for a speaking engagement. It was more about when I'm one-on-one with groups, with working in the field with people that do the work, and I asked the question, are you aware of an incident that wasn't reported in the last 12 months? And it's almost 100% yes. Especially in the larger organisations, it's always 100% yes. Yet when I go to management, we're talking about what they think their culture is or their reporting culture. The Brady review, Brady talked about a reporting culture. Not sure where he got it from, but anyway, as a measure of safety. But he said that's got to be addressed. They all said they had a great reporting culture. Well, do you? Like, have you asked the question? Have you set up the environment in your organisation to encourage people to report? So if you have so that's how the organisation ceases learning, because they hide things, or they mightn't be able to hide the event, but they'll certainly hide some of the circumstances if they think they're going to get blamed, because no one wants to get blamed. They're already kicking themselves, firstly, for being involved in one, but no one wants to get blamed. So that can really damage a company's culture by having a blame environment. So that's probably the strongest thing that I see.
I guess that links closely with the elements that Sydney Decker brings up, is having a just culture.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned reporting culture. I think Sydney was probably one of the first ones to talk about the aspects of that.
Yeah.
But they all have an impact on each other from a holistic safety culture point of view. It's probably part of what we call good practice elements.
Yeah. So, Sydney talks about a just restorative culture. And he talks about, he's talked about the fact that when there's especially when he was doing the work with the NHS in England, and there were, look at the Tipton case and things like that, where there's a victim, which might be especially in healthcare, with the person, that might have passed away or received, or the care didn't have the outcomes they wanted. But there's also the people involved in that care are the second victim. And that's where, I've seen companies that someone will be involved in it, they stand them down. Off you go. You go home and sit there and worry about your job. I've seen it where that person's been hurt and stood down. So they're hurt twice. They're hurt twice. And then the best person to explain what was happening is unavailable to you to learn from, because they've sent them home. So again, what does it do? What do the workmates feel? Hide the injury, because that way you don't get sent home. You can't get blamed if you hide it. They don't know about it. What they don't know won't hurt us. And that's a horrible thing to think about from an organisational point of view, especially when managers need the best information to make good decisions. And that just doesn't happen in that sort of cultural environment.
A lot of people talk about the fact that we know what our safety culture is, and then when you chat to them, it's quite apparent that they can't really put their finger on what it is. So, in terms of measuring your safety culture, I want to talk to you about how important that might be, your thoughts on measurement, because if you don't understand your culture, you can't shape it for where you want it to be, so that your business objectives and safety objectives are met, and making sure that they're actually aligned as well.
I think the biggest issue is they don't know what culture is. They can't define what a culture is. I do have an issue with the term safety culture as a standalone, because do we have a production culture? Do we then have a supply culture? Do we have a human resource culture? If we have a culture of blame, it's not just going to affect people in safety. It's going to affect production. So if the production numbers up, we'll blame. I think some of it might stem also is that, that old hangover from the Westminster system where we've got ministerial accountability and, someone injures himself, at the coalface, and yet the manager gets the blame whose full layers removed. And so I just don't understand. I challenged some academics from Griffith Uni last year, and they couldn't answer what the difference between how many cultures does an organisation have. But as we discussed, I think there's an overarching culture and there's perhaps some subsets. But I think you can't have a good safety culture. You can't have just one good culture in the organisation, because I don't think it works that way. I don't think people differentiate, because although we may differentiate, although some people may differentiate between safety, production, work, and that, they don't. Them it's just work. So measuring culture is an interesting thing. I think in terms of the safety space, we've got to be careful. If we measure culture on just the absence of incidents, then it's sort of like, well, we can hide the incidents. Does that mean we have a good safety culture? We look at birds trying.
Not even hide them. You might just be lucky.
Well, you might just be lucky. And companies rely on the birds trying. It's like, well, it's not even correct. But the symbolism was there about weak signals. But yeah, they just they focus on these things, and it just drives. Are we good or are we lucky? It hides things. So I just measuring on the absence of incidents. I don't think we can do that. I don't think we can measure on reporting. I think we need tools that actually delve more psychological into the psychological aspect and the psychological culture of a company. Maybe that's what we should be calling it, the psychological culture of a company. I don't know. But yeah, I know there's risks. I know where the risks are in some of the measures used. The other risk I think is we have people who, like a lot of organisations will put out surveys. Are they psychologically founded? Are they making sure that the question sets they're using don't direct the person answering that survey to a certain response? There's a great video clip, a great scene from Yes Minister. I'm not sure if you've seen it. Have a look at it. It'll be on YouTube, where they talk about a survey about national conscription or national service, and they say, and it's just an example of how you can. And I won't go into the whole clip, obviously, but yeah, just by depending upon what the questions you ask, the preceding questions. The last question's the same. Are you in favour of national service? You ask the preceding questions the right way, you'll get a no. You ask the preceding questions the other way, you'll get a yes. So I think we've got to be careful with some of those survey tools to make sure that they have a good foundation and get the right result. I think probably one of the best ways to get in and understand a culture, as opposed to measure it, is probably just embedded learning. Actually being in the field with the people doing the work and observing and talking, creating trust. Mm-hmm. Without trust, you're never going to get you're never going to get the truth. So I think ethnographical learning is probably one of the best ways to actually understand a culture. How do you measure it? Oh, maybe that's your expertise, not mine.
It is. It's something we do, and I like the fact that you bring up getting embedded in the organisation. You really do get a deep, rich learning of how things are done, and that's a part of culture.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of time, and time's money. So there's other ways. So looking at the artefacts within the organisation that are observable, and then the next level down is getting people's implicit knowledge about the organisation, how things work. So you need that scope of between what's invisible, which is the implicit knowledge, and you have to go ask about that, and what's observable, like the artefacts, and actually embedding yourself and making observations there.
Yeah.
I'm glad you raised that. That's good. Not a lot of people think at that level in terms of how can we define the culture. So it's not just surveys alone, although surveys is a good economical way to do it, providing you don't have the bias built in that you did mention.
And the actual thing is the bias is probably the hardest thing. So even in our investigations, bias is the hardest things. I learned, I did things the established way for a lot of years. I taught taproot. I taught people taproot. I've been involved in ICAM investigations. I've led ICAMs. I've been down that path, and I used to have a bias for supervision, and I knew I had a bias for supervision. It didn't protect me from knowing it, even though I had that bias. It didn't protect that outcome. Now, with what I've learned and read and understand now, and a bit more experience, I guess, and age helps, I guess. Knowing that I don't know what I don't know, has enabled me to be genuinely curious. So I think that's one of the keys, being genuinely curious. And there's no simple answer. If we just grasp a simple answer and say, and culture is one of those things.
It's complex.
It's not simple.
No.
And this is the thing. I talk to clients about culture and say, well, what do you want your culture to be? First question I ask is that when I start talking about culture, well, what is that culture? And they can't define it. More often than not, they don't know what they want their culture to be. And if you don't know what your culture is, what you want it to be, then even if you find out what your culture is, how can you put any intervention in place when you don't know where you want to go?
That's right.
So yeah, it's interesting.
It's almost like the reverse as well. If you don't know where you are, how are you going to get there too?
Well, it's yeah. I mean, I'm loath to use a journey metaphor because I think it's my. I have a bias against the journey metaphor, but yeah. So investigations, biases, and surveys, biases. You can't get rid of a bias. Like people. Drew Ray talks about biases, and you cannot remove a bias because you have it. You can just acknowledge it and make sure that you fight your bias along every step of the way, and genuine reflection that you have that bias, acknowledge it, and then make sure, and try every effort to make sure it doesn't flavor the outcomes.
Yeah. That's a disclaimer that should be made on any measurement you actually do, because there is a bias.
But sometimes you don't know what they are.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How many biases are there?
Oh, exactly. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. That's great. I like the fact that you talk about culture being complex. I guess the trick is that you don't overcomplicate it and you don't oversimplify it. You've got to find that middle ground in terms of helping people to understand it. And what we do is as part of our measurement process is help, and then the reporting of that is help people understand that it's multi-layered. So you spoke. I like the fact you spoke about the organisational culture, and there might be subsets, and we see safety as a subset in that. But it's also an overarching macro culture, which quite often is shaped by geography, where you live.
Yeah.
Your race, your religion, things like that.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like organisational culture is the frozen layer, like in a management structure, because you've got that macro culture sitting over the top of it, and then you've got the micro cultures, which sit below it as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a diverse organisation, which is like it might be like quite often football teams will talk about culture. But they talk about it as a high-performance culture. They don't talk about it. That's where they want a high-performance culture. And they've got a microism of a workplace. But, I've got a client with 53 workplaces. And some of those have 60 people. Some of those have 3.
Mm.
And so the culture at those places could be wildly different and based on probably the culture of the bias of the person that's a supervisor.
Yeah. It's very difficult to understand that culture and shape it or manage it unless you understand all those different elements that make up the organisational culture. Yeah,
definitely.
That's good. Mark, we tuned into your video session you ran through the Australian Institute of Health and Safety.
Yeah.
Last week or week before? Fairly recent.
Last week.
Yeah. It was great.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It was great. We really enjoyed it. The whole team sat there and listened and learned something from it. And one of the things you spoke about that sort of pricked our interest, because we hadn't heard about it before, is the concept of blue line, black line. I'd like you to tell us a bit more about that, because the part of the message we took away is it's something that if you can implement and understand, then it helps against a blame culture that we already spoke about before.
Well, the whole focus of the technique is to shift the thinking from who failed to what failed. So we remove the blames and to really understand what failed. It's really poor. It's poor technique just to look at the event. We need to look at the task. So to do that, basically, we call the procedures the black line. So the policies, procedures, the training, that's the black line. It's written in ink, that's why it's black. And it's really work as imagined. So when people write that procedure, it's how they imagine the work's going to happen. Because they're not writing it as the work occurs, they're writing it beforehand. So they imagine it, they intend it, and they might have well planned and prepared for it. It might be a really good intention, but it can never account for all the variability. So people are complex adaptive beings. So workers come to work to get the job done. So if you give them a hammer and they need a chisel, they'll use the hammer. If you give them scissors and they need a knife, they'll use the scissors. They just want to get the job done. So how they do a task varies all the time, and there's all these trade-offs. So there's trade-offs between safety. Safety and production is a trade-off. Workers will only be as safe as they need to be until they're not. So they'll trade off on safety. They'll trade off on there's production pressure, and that term perceived production pressure does my head in because it is production pressure. We have to produce. That's just, otherwise an organisation's out of business. So there's always some form of production pressure. It doesn't matter what anyone says. There's resource constraints. They don't have the right equipment, tools, people call in sick, and all those things affect how the work is done all the time. Those are where the systemic issues lie. Because if the issues are there all the time, if we just fix the linear one without the context, then we only have a chance at fixing those. But if we understand the broad range of the work, we understand all the issues that the workers are facing. Not just when things are good, but when things are bad. When things go really well, we can look, oh, hang on, that goes really well. We should improve it. So if we identify all those issues around the work, the good and the not so good, or the well and the not so well, and we can improve those conditions, it improves morale. Because workers know they're going to come with the right tools for the job, the resource constraints will be minimised. Yeah, they still might have to adapt, but we've done everything we can as an organisation to assist them, and we've listened to them because they're the ones that are telling this. So one of the key things is the people involved in an event, we bring them in. I want to learn from you, and or everyone else that does that task. So the workers feel engaged, listened to, valued, and that all contributes to the morale, which contributes to the culture of the organisation. So it's learning about the normal work, not just this linear function. Typically with those sort of investigations, and it doesn't matter if it's ICAM or Taproot or whatever it is, it's directed outcomes. They give you a book, and what you look for, you'll find. Whereas with the blue line investigation or the blue line black line investigation, you're actually just looking for everything, good and bad. So, and that's really important. So I think the outcomes in terms of culture for organisations that successfully implement this will have an effect actually on the people on the shop floor doing the work.
Yeah. So that's where work is done, as done, versus those that imagine work as it should be done.
Yeah.
And then sitting in between, we write up how we think it should be done.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's bridging that gap, identifying those issues, and then doing something about them, and not based on some book or some chart. It's based on risk to your business.
A dynamic environment where things change.
That's right.
Rather than the procedures written up
it's
for
all
a static.
Yeah, exactly. The messy conditions. Let's get the messy conditions, because work, like culture, is very complex. So and to simplify it down to work that didn't follow a procedure, well, you're not going to learn anything there.
No. That's great. Now that gives us a very good insight into that tool, blue line, black line, and how that would help in terms of the blame culture.
Thanks.
Yeah. Mark, thanks very much. Been very interesting talk.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's been great, thanks for having me.
So we can see how coffee and culture mix well, although yours is a Coke.
Yeah, well, it's one of my vices, one of many.